The chandeliers sparkled above the grand marble hall, but despite the opulence and the wealth that glittered across the room, silence hung heavy. Elena Vance, one of the youngest and most powerful CEOs in the city, stood at the center of her company's lavish anniversary gala. She had everything people dream of: power, money, influence, but her eyes were fixed not on the dazzling future, but on the grand piano standing silently in the corner of the hall. The very sight of it pierced her heart with an ache she had carried since childhood. It wasn't business that consumed her that night, it was the music she had lost, the music she thought she would never hear again. And in that moment, before hundreds of guests, she made an impossible challenge that would change her life forever: "Play Chopin for me, and I'll marry you." The room erupted in murmurs, laughter, and disbelief. It was a jest to some, arrogance to others. But what no one knew was that Elena's words carried a truth she had buried deep inside, a truth that only one unlikely person in that room would dare to answer. Sparkles, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the way destiny can bring people together in the most unexpected ways, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to Royal Stories so you never miss another powerful tale like this one. Sparkles. Elena had grown up in a world that was more fragile than anyone could imagine. Her father, a wealthy magnate, had been emotionally distant, and her mother had passed away when she was just a girl. Her only comfort in those lonely nights was music, the soft, sorrowful notes of Chopin that her mother used to play on the piano. But after her mother's death, the piano was closed, covered in dust, forbidden to be touched in that grand empty mansion. Elena never forgot those melodies, but life dragged her away. Years of ruthless business decisions, battles for power, and endless ambition left her heart hardened. She became the CEO who had no time for emotions, no space for vulnerability. And yet, every time she saw a piano, she felt her mother's presence, like a whisper of love she could never reach again. That was why, in her moment of vulnerability during the gala, the challenge slipped from her lips. She wasn't truly searching for a husband, she was searching for someone who could bring back the one thing she had lost: the music of her soul. The guests scoffed, raised their glasses, and carried on with shallow conversations. To them, Elena's words were nothing but the playful arrogance of a powerful woman testing the world. But one man heard her differently. He was not seated among the elite, nor dressed in fine silk. His name was Samuel Hayes, a janitor in his mid-40s with graying hair and tired eyes, dressed in his plain uniform, unnoticed as he pushed his cart along the marble floor. Samuel had always blended into the background, invisible to those who walked past him. But when he heard Elena's challenge, his heart trembled. Because Samuel, too, carried the weight of Chopin in his soul. Years ago, Samuel had been a pianist with promise, a young man who had once dreamed of performing in grand halls. He had studied passionately, pouring his heart into the keys. But life had struck him cruelly. His wife had fallen ill, and the medical bills swallowed everything. He abandoned his dream, sold his piano, and took whatever work he could find. He never played again. Now, as a janitor in the very building where music and power intertwined, he had long accepted invisibility as his fate. But Elena's words awoke something he thought was dead. With trembling hands, Samuel approached the piano. Guests stared, confused, some even sneering at the janitor daring to step near the instrument. Elena herself looked at him, stunned, half ready to dismiss him, but before she could speak, Samuel sat down and rested his weary hands on the ivory keys. Silence fell across the hall. Then, slowly, the first haunting notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air. The music rose like a voice from heaven itself, soft, tender, filled with pain and longing. Every note carried his sacrifices, his love, his grief, and his lost dreams. The janitor's music was not flawless, it was alive. Elena's world shattered. In those notes, she heard her mother again. She felt the warmth of being held, the tears of loss, and the tenderness she had buried under years of armor. Tears streamed down her face as the guest stood in stunned silence. And when the last note lingered in the air, the room erupted, not with laughter, but with thunderous applause. But Elena could not move. She stood frozen, staring at Samuel as if seeing him for the first time. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Samuel looked at her, his eyes weary but unafraid, and said words that silenced her heart. "I'm just a man who lost everything, but not the music." For the first time in her life, Elena felt powerless. Not to money, not to status, but to the raw truth of a man who had carried more pain than she could imagine. That night, Samuel did not accept her challenge as a joke. He did not laugh at her promise of marriage. Instead, he gave her something far greater, a mirror to her own broken soul. In the days that followed, Elena could not stop thinking about him. She sought him out, speaking to him in quiet corners of the company where no one else noticed. She learned his story, the wife he had lost, the dreams he had given up, the humility he carried like a cloak. And slowly, she began to see that beneath his rough hands and quiet demeanor was a man of more strength and grace than any CEO she had ever met. But her board members, her wealthy friends, and the elite around her were outraged. How could the CEO of one of the largest companies in the city be seen with a janitor? Rumors spread, investors grew uneasy, and pressure mounted. Elena faced a choice: abandon him and protect her empire, or stand by the man who had shown her heart what it truly longed for. The battle tore her apart. For once, she was not fighting for profit, but for love. Then came the defining moment. At another company event, Elena stood once more before her guests, the same elite who had once laughed at her words. She called Samuel to the stage and asked him to play again. This time, she stood beside him as his music filled the air. When the last note ended, she spoke clearly, her voice steady. "This man reminded me of something I lost, the courage to feel. And if the world thinks he is unworthy, then let the world know I choose him anyway." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some mocked, others were stunned. But Elena no longer cared. Samuel, humbled and overwhelmed, could barely meet her eyes. And yet, in that moment, their destinies bound together, not by wealth or status, but by the music that had saved them both. Their story spread beyond the walls of the company. People whispered of the CEO who chose a janitor, of the music that healed two broken souls. And though their path was not easy, though they faced judgment and doubt, they built something far greater than empire or wealth. They built a life where music never stopped playing, where pain was transformed into beauty, and where love was born not from power, but from the courage to listen. And so, when Elena's promise came true, when she took Samuel's hand in marriage, it was not the gala, not the piano, not even the vows that silenced the world. It was the quiet moment after, when Samuel played Chopin just for her, and she wept in his arms, finally at peace. Sparkling heart, if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Royal Stories, and leave a comment to tell us how you felt. Every word of support keeps us bringing you more powerful stories like this one. Sparkling heart, Sparkle's special request. Comment below what song or piece of music has ever made you cry or remember someone you love. Sparkles.